Hello everyone. Today we are going to watch a heavy-taste science fiction horror movie, The Blob. The monster here does not rely on appearance to scare people, but it carries an even more deadly danger. This monster has no specific shape, and the mucus it secretes is 100 times more corrosive than strong acid. Once a prey is wrapped by it, not even bones will remain. A red fireball tore through the night sky and crashed into the forest of a remote small town in America. This scene happened to be seen by a homeless man, and driven by curiosity, he found the crash site of the fireball. In the cracks of the huge meteor, there was a mass of steaming, giant slime-like substance. The homeless man picked up a branch to poke at the slime, and to his surprise, it kept bouncing like it was alive. The slime tightly wrapped around the homeless man's hand. Its intense corrosiveness was melting his flesh, and he let out a heart-piercing scream that happened to be heard by Brian, who was nearby fixing his motorcycle. Just as Brian hesitated whether to go and check, the homeless man suddenly ran toward him. Terrified, he raised an axe not to chop at Brian, but aimed at his own wrist. The slime was too terrifying. The homeless man would rather cut off his hand than be trapped by it. But unexpectedly, in the next second, the slime covered the wound on his wrist, and no matter how he tried, he could not shake it off. Brian, witnessing the entire process, could hardly believe his own eyes. The homeless man ran desperately toward the highway, and Brian, worried, followed him. Blinded by panic, the homeless man collides head-on with an oncoming car. The driver was Paul, who was on his way to take his girlfriend Meg on a date. Seeing that they had hit someone, they quickly pulled the homeless man into the car to take him to the hospital. Brian warned them to be careful of the man's hand, because the slime wrapped around it seemed to have a strong corrosive effect. Paul suspected that all this was somehow related to Brian, so he insisted Brian also come along to the hospital. After arranging the homeless man to be hospitalized, Paul and Meg stayed to fill out forms, while Brian chose to leave. While buying water and passing by the ward, Paul noticed something unusual. He went to check and was shocked by what he saw.
Doctor, come in here quickly!
I'm with a patient.
There's a man dying in here! Hurry!
The homeless man's lower body had been completely corroded, and his death was tragic and terrifying. Paul immediately ran to the office to call the police, but he did not notice that the blood-red slime had already climbed up the wall and onto the ceiling. Only when droplets of slime dripped down and corroded the desk did he realize the danger. The next second, the slime surged toward Paul. Meg rushed over after hearing the noise, but unfortunately, it was already too late. Paul died tragically, and Meg fainted from extreme shock. When the police arrived, the monster had already vanished without a trace. But they did not believe Meg's words, thinking she was simply too frightened and confused. Learning that Brian was the first to discover the homeless man, Sheriff Geller decided he must be the murderer. Meanwhile, Scott was dating Vicky in the forest on the hill, unaware that danger was quietly approaching. When he got out of the car to mix drinks at the trunk, something in the nearby bushes was quickly moving toward them, but neither he nor Vicky in the car noticed. By the time Scott returned to the car, Vicky had already fallen asleep. Scott was no gentleman, and he thought it was the perfect chance to take advantage, so he unbuttoned Vicky's shirt.
I'll do another one then.
But the monster had already taken over Vicky's body, and poor Scott became its midnight snack. After the feast, the monster grew even larger. It moved toward the small town, and soon, a storm of blood and terror would break out there. Back at the police station, the interrogation of Brian yielded nothing, but without solid evidence, Sheriff Geller had no choice but to let him go. Soon, they received another report and went to the forest where Scott had been, but after searching the entire hill, they found no clues at all. Brian left the station and went to a small bar he often visited. Meg came to him and told him everything that had happened to Paul. Brian was shocked. That jelly-like thing not only changed shape, it could even eat people. As they discussed their next move, the blob had already entered the kitchen and blocked the drain. The plunger did not work, so the cook reached in with his bare hand, only to pull out a slimy, sticky mass, staring at it in confusion. But the accidents were only just beginning. Brian took Meg and hid in the freezer at the very last moment. The lady boss escaped through the window into the alley outside where there happened to be a phone booth. Just as she was calling the police, the blob slowly wrapped the phone booth so tightly that no gap was left. The call finally connected, and the operator told the lady boss that the sheriff had just gone to her tavern. The moment the words fell, the lady boss looked up and saw a terrifying scene. Sheriff Geller had already been devoured by the blob. As the phone booth was crushed by the blob, the lady boss was swallowed as well. When Meg and Brian walked out of the freezer, the store was eerily silent and there was not a single shadow in sight. They did not yet know that Sheriff Geller had been devoured by the blob, so they immediately went to the police station to look for him. The operator said the radio was being interfered with, and they could not reach Sheriff Geller. But Deputy Briggs was still investigating on the hill, and they could go to him if needed. Meanwhile, at the tavern, Reverend Meeker saw the blob flash by on his way home after work. Not only was he unafraid, but he even ran into the tavern alone to investigate. The mucus left behind on the ground by the blob had already crystallized. Meeker picked up a few pieces and put them into a glass jar to take home. At the foot of the hill, Meg and Brian saw the deputy's car, but there was no one inside. The headlights were still on. Without hesitation, they walked into the forest, and not far in, they heard the roar of plane engines above their heads. It was military helicopters, and right after, a group of people in protective suits walked over. Leading them was Dr. Meddows, and Briggs was with them. Dr. Meddows told Meg and Brian that they were a government biological quarantine team sent to investigate a meteor that had fallen from outer space. Upon inspection, the meteor carried a large number of bacteria, and if the hill was not sealed off quickly, it could bring a terrible plague to mankind. Hearing this, Brian told Dr. Meddows that the meteor did bring danger, but it was something 10,000 times more terrifying than bacteria. After learning the blob had killed people, Dr. Meddows told them that until the blob was captured and every resident examined, the town would be declared a quarantine zone. Since Meg and Brian had close contact with the blob for safety, Dr. Meddows would not allow them to return to the town, and instead forced them to be taken to City Hall for isolation. Brian felt this group could not be trusted, so on the way he picked the lock and jumped out of the vehicle. Meg, worried about her family, chose to stay. At this time, another tragedy struck in the town, and the location was a private cinema. The projectionist felt the room was stuffy and went to check the air vent, only to be struck down instantly by the blob hiding inside. Not long after, the cinema owner came to look for the projectionist, not knowing where he had gone. By the time Meg returned to town, Dr. Meddows' men were already organizing all the residents for quarantine. Before entering City Hall, everyone had to answer several questions, such as whether they had fever or vomiting, and then take a preventive vaccine. At the entrance, Meg successfully reunited with her parents, but her younger brother Kevin was not there. It turned out he had gone to the cinema with his friend Eddie. Meg asked the staff for help, but was told she had to wait. Worried about her brother's safety, Meg could not wait and went to the cinema alone. The movie was still playing, but because the sound was loud, when the projectionist and the owner were attacked, no one heard anything, and no one realized that danger was right beside them. When the crowd saw a giant creature they had never seen before, the cinema instantly fell into chaos. As everyone frantically ran for their lives, Meg resolutely chose to move against the flow. In the hall, those who had not escaped in time were already wrapped and devoured by the blob. Meg tried to help a woman lying on the ground, but when she saw her face clearly, she realized it had already been corroded beyond recognition. Fortunately, Kevin and Eddie were still alive. They hurried toward the back door to escape, but just as they closed it, Kevin's clothes were caught in the door. He tried to take off his clothes, but the zipper would not open at this critical moment. The screws on the iron door popped out one by one, and time was running out. Meg pulled hard and finally managed to open Kevin's zipper. Just as they ran out, the blob burst through the door. The danger was not over, because they had run into a dead end. With no choice, they opened a manhole and went down into the sewer. At this moment, the blob had already caught up, stretching out its tentacles to latch onto Meg's hair. Brian returned to the hill and found his motorcycle, and when he passed the crash site of the meteor, he discovered Dr. Meddows was having it dug out. To his shock, beneath the meteor was actually a satellite. Hiding in the bushes, Brian overheard their conversation. It turned out that this satellite had fallen out of orbit, and the unknown creature inside had fallen into the forest along with it. Even more terrifying, the satellite carried an experimental virus developed by the military. Under the influence of the virus, this creature that hunted its prey had evolved into a top predator. Dr. Meddows and the team were thrilled, but researcher Jennings was very worried because this creature grew too fast. From the landing until now, its size had already increased by at least 1,000 times. If it kept growing like this, it would be impossible to contain. As for this hidden danger, the others did not take it seriously at all. Jennings could not accept that innocent residents would become sacrifices in biological warfare, but Dr. Meddows would not listen at all. In his view, creating a great weapon was for the whole of America, and the sacrificed residents of the small town could be regarded as dying for for their country. Dr. Meddows told Jennings to put away the thoughts he should not have and to strictly carry out the mission. Orders from the military were like mountains. Even if Jennings was dissatisfied inside, he could only obey. Learning that the creature had entered the town's sewer, Dr. Meddows ordered it to be captured alive. And as for Meg and the other two trapped in the sewer, they would just have to be sacrificed. At that moment, Brian, who had been hiding and eavesdropping, exposed his whereabouts, but with quick reflexes he knocked down the discoverer and escaped on his motorcycle. Dr. Meddows sent out squads and even deployed helicopters to capture him. Fortunately, Brian's riding skills were extraordinary, not only dodging bullets time and again, but also successfully shaking off his pursuers. In the end, he hid beside the sewer outlet, avoiding the helicopters. Dr. Meddows obtained the structural map of the town's sewers and found the pipelines inside were extremely complicated, but as long as 3 gates were closed, they could surely trap it. At this moment, Meg was carefully leading Kevin and Eddie through the sewer, searching for an exit. Suddenly, the calm water began to ripple. Meg helped Kevin climb onto a pipe, but when it was Eddie's turn, he was dragged away by the Blob's tentacle. She dove into the water trying to save him, but it was all in vain. Just as Meg was about to give out, Dr. Meddows' men arrived fully armed. While the Blob's attention was diverted, Meg told Kevin to run quickly to City Hall to take shelter, and then she leapt back into the water and climbed up a slope nearby. The slope was slippery and very hard to climb, and the Blob once again set its eyes on her. At the critical moment, Brian saw Meg and pulled her up. They rode the motorcycle through the pipes, but very soon, the road ahead was cut off. Searching for another way, they once again ran straight into the Blob. There was no time to hesitate. Brian gritted his teeth and managed to leap right over the Blob. Although they temporarily shook off the Blob, Brian's motorcycle broke down at this crucial moment. With no choice, they abandoned the motorcycle and continued on foot. Not far along, they ran into Jennings, and the soldiers who had been with him on the mission had already been killed by the Blob. Their top priority was to get out to the surface as soon as possible. With Jennings leading the way, they quickly found the exit, but just when they were one step away from escaping, reality hit them with a cruel blow. Dr. Meddows, in order to trap the Blob, actually sealed the manhole completely, disregarding Jennings' life. At that moment, Jennings noticed the water level nearby rising continuously. This meant the monster was already very, very close to them. Brian refused to wait for death, so he grabbed the rocket launcher from Jennings and blasted the manhole cover open. After climbing out, Brian confronted the military with the weapon, while also revealing Dr. Meddows' lies to the town residents. Briggs, worried the situation would spiral out of control, told both sides not to act rashly. Dr. Meddows, furious, slandered Brian by saying he had been infected by bacteria and was trying to spread a plague to take revenge on society. Just as the 3 sides were deadlocked, an accident happened again, and this time, the unlucky one was none other than Dr. Meddows, who had brought it upon himself. The death of Dr. Meddows let everyone truly witness the terror of the Blob. The remaining members of the military no longer tried to capture it alive. Instead, they concentrated their firepower and frantically shot into the sewer. After running out of bullets, they threw explosive packs down. With a loud bang, everyone thought the Blob must have been blown into pieces. But only a few seconds later, the ground began to shake as if something was about to burst out. The Blob was far more formidable than anyone imagined. It was not afraid of bullets, and even fire, which all carbon-based life feared, could not harm it at all. Meeker was accidentally burned by fire. Meg quickly grabbed a dry ice extinguisher and put it out right away. Just after saving Meeker, Meg drew the monster's attention. Unexpectedly, the Blob was not afraid of fire, but it was terrified of the cold brought by dry ice. After that, under Meg's cover, the survivors successfully hid inside City Hall. But while they were blocking the gate with heavy objects, the Blob's tentacles reached through the gaps, and Briggs heroically sacrificed himself. And the City Hall, which seemed safe, actually could not last very long. Brian drove a fire truck to provide support. By this time, the Blob had already wrapped around nearly half of City Hall, and once a weakness was found, it would seep in from every corner. Without delay, Brian sprayed the Blob with dry ice, and instantly its surface began to peel off. But just doing that was not enough to kill the Blob. Sensing Brian's presence, the Blob crawled toward him. Brian tried to ram the Blob with the truck, but it was so strong that it easily overturned the fire truck. Hearing the crash, Meg rushed over despite the danger. Seeing the Blob wrapping around the fire truck, Meg knew that if she didn't act, Brian would be lost. She found an explosive pack and a machine gun on a soldier. Although bullets could not kill the blob, at least they could distract it. Meg's plan worked, and Brian seized the chance to escape from the fire truck. What the blob did not know was that Meg had placed the explosive pack on top of a tank full of dry ice. At the very last moment before the explosion, Meg and Brian ran to a safe zone, while the blob was blown apart into pieces amid the blast and the billowing dry ice. Thus, a crisis that concerned the survival of humanity seemed to be resolved. However, the appearance of Meeker signaled that it was not truly over. Do you still remember the crystallized mucus he had collected from the tavern? Now they had actually turned into little monsters. From what Meeker had said when he first saw the creature, it was clear that it would not be long before he released them. And soon, a new storm was bound to begin. After watching this movie, many people might feel it was nothing special. But don't forget, this was a work from 37 years ago. The story itself was not complicated, and even the first 20 minutes of the film seemed somewhat redundant. But the monster design was absolutely ahead of its time, and even today, it still shines. Alright, that's the end of today's story. See you next time.